I'm going to be real with y'all. I went back and forth about making this video because I already know what's going to happen. The Paige army is coming like the British in 1775. I know people won't agree with this, which is fine. All I ask is you hear me out first. Paige had the greatest season of a freshman ever. The fact she's the only freshman to win National Player of the Year, the John Wooden Award, and AP Player of the Year is proof of this. I got nothing bad to say about her. You can't ask anyone to play better than what she played. She was phenomenal, and I'm not taking that away from her. But if we keeping it 100, Aari McDonald got robbed. Everybody's going crazy about Caitlin Clark carrying Iowa to the national championship game, but she at least had Monica Sonato. Aari literally had no offensive help at all and almost won the national championship game by herself. If you aren't in Arizona or a hardcore women basketball fan, you never heard of these players. Kate Reese, Trinity Baptiste, Bendy Yini, Sam Thomas. None of these players got drafted. Meanwhile, this is what Paige Bueckers had for her starting lineup. Evina Westbrook, 21st pick in the draft. Christian Williams, 14th pick in the draft. Olivia Nelson-Ododa, 17th pick in the draft. And Aaliyah Edwards, who is projected to be top 10 in this year's draft. Not to mention UConn has a way deeper bench. The voters really saw Aari take a mediocre roster to the Final Four and were like, nah, Paige leading a team coached by Gino and full of WNBA caliber players is more impressive. This is absolutely wild to me. What makes it even worse is that after Paige got the award, she gets cooked by Aari McDonald, furthering the idea that McDonald should have got the award over Paige. If we are talking about who was more valuable to their team, it's not even close. Arizona hasn't been in the NCAAW tournament since 2005. UConn competes for a title every year, so we have to look at stats, which is ultimately the reason why Paige Bueckers got the National Player of the Year award. But here's my issue with this. If just looking at stats, why didn't Caitlin Clark get it? She has a more impressive stat line than either of them. This is where context matters. Paige was a much better defender than Caitlin Clark that year. But here's the thing. Paige was a really good defender, but Aari was one of the best defenders in the entire country. She won Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year and was a finalist for National Defensive Player of the Year. Paige Bueckers' efficiency was unmatched. Aari's stats were similar to Paige, but Paige blew her out of the water in terms of field goal percentage, three-point shooting, and free throw percentage. This is where I bring up Angel Reese. Angel Reese had one of the most ridiculous stat lines out of any college player last year, but she wasn't a Naismith finalist. Why is that? Because they acknowledged the fact that she was playing a significantly weaker schedule, which I think is valid. But why aren't we using this logic for Paige, who was dominating the Big East, while Paige got to play teams like Xavier, St. John, and Villanova? Aari was playing teams like Stanford, UCLA, and Oregon. There's a huge difference in the level of competition. Now, of course, UConn plays a lot of good non-conference opponents. But even when you factor that in, Arizona had a top 10 strength of schedule. UConn didn't even have a top 30 strength of schedule. And here's further evidence that strength of schedule had a huge impact on their numbers. Let's look at Paige Bueckers' tournament stats compared to Aari McDonald's. We'll have the cutoff be the Elite 8, since this is presumably the last game they saw before voting. Aari's rebounding and scoring increased, but more importantly, her efficiency shot up. She shot over 50% from the field and a crazy 50% from three. Meanwhile, Paige-based stats stayed around the same, but her shooting took a drop off. When facing a similar level of competition, Paige and Aari's numbers become a lot closer. Not that they were that far off to begin with. Women's college basketball is getting like NBA MVP voting. They make narratives to favor certain players over others. When Aaliyah Boston was in the conversation, despite having inferior stats, they talked about how she gets doubled and triple teamed, which is true. But why aren't we applying this logic to Aari? She had tougher coverages than Paige and had a similar stat line, but somehow isn't even considered a nominee for National Player of the Year. I'll go deeper into this in a minute. Teams could hyper-focus on McDonald, and she was still giving them buckets. You couldn't do this to Paige because she is surrounded by WNBA caliber players. Look at the types of coverages Aari was seeing compared to Paige. They could afford to swarm Aari with defenders because she wasn't with high-level players. I'm not saying she was playing with complete trash. They are great defenders and great at setting screens, but there's a clear difference in the level of talent she was playing with compared to other elite teams. The quality of Aari's teammates is also important when looking at her assist numbers. On the surface, it's easy to say that Paige is a better passer, but her teammates were simply just better at scoring. There were so many times where Aari would hit the wide open player only for them to brick it. On the other hand, Paige had players who were great at putting the ball on the floor and creating shots for themselves. This is where I have a huge issue with the NCAA. Aari McDonald wasn't even named as a finalist. This is just straight up unacceptable. It's one thing to argue that Paige played better, but when you deliberately ignore the type of season Aari had, something is clearly going on. They didn't even want to entertain the conversation because people would start thinking. I hate to even go this route, but it's hard to argue this isn't agenda-driven. Caitlin Clark not being a finalist either is completely suspect. There's no doubt in my mind the committee handpicked players who had no case to be the player of the year over Paige Bueckers. There's no justifiable reason whatsoever for Dana Evans and Ryan Howard to be finalists over Aari McDonald. I don't know how someone leads the country in points and assists while having ridiculous shooting efficiency and doesn't become a Naismith finalist or a first-team All-American. And if we really want to have a conversation, what made Ryan Howard, Aaliyah Boston, and Dana Evans a better player than Naz Hillman that season? But let's get back on topic. This is about Paige versus Aari. I just feel like once the media has an idea who the player of the year should be, they get tunnel vision. It doesn't matter what anyone else does for the rest of the year, their mind is made up. In a vacuum, Paige is a better player. But if we are talking about who had a better season, it's easily Aari McDonald. I don't see how what Paige did on a stacked UConn team was more impressive than someone carrying an Arizona team that's never even made the Sweet 16. Everybody lost their mind over Caitlin Clark carrying a mid-roster to the championship game. But 2 years ago, when Aari did it, nobody cared. I'm going to get hate for this, but I really believe Paige got the award because it made a better narrative. I wouldn't feel so strongly about this if it wasn't for the bogus finalist selection. The media did everything in their power to make her the face of women's basketball. So the best way to get people to buy in is to have her be the first freshman ever to win all these Player of the Year awards. Paige Bueckers and Haley Van Lith had the biggest hype machines in women basketball history. So they will do anything to keep it going. I want to reiterate, this isn't me attacking Paige. She's easily one of the best players in college basketball and has done things not many players have done. Any issue I have is with the media and voters. People will say, man, you just hating on Paige. Paige was more efficient, especially from the free throw line, but Aari was a better defender, played harder competition, and carried a worse team. Aari McDonald should have been the National Player of the Year in 2021, and I stand on that. Whether you agree or not, I respect your opinion. Comment who you think should have been National Player of the Year. Did they get it right, or should someone else have got it? Thanks for tuning in.